Ole Miss is a commit away from winning the transfer portal yet again.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's show, we're diving into how Ole Miss is just one commit away from securing back-to-back transfer portal titles. It's been an intriguing offseason with Ole Miss stumbling just short of its potential for a national championship level run. We all know that. But despite the setbacks, Lane Kiffin has stayed focused, turning this year's transfer portal haul into a masterpiece while signing his best high school class since arriving at Ole Miss. Betting sites are very high on this Ole Miss football team. We'll break down why those expectations are soaring in just a little bit. You know, we're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. And a special shout out to the insiders and everydayers who keep this show thriving. Do not forget to check out Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy for fresh perspectives on college football, the SEC, and yes, even Ole Miss. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. So after the season ended, there's been a lot of fans that just wanted to kind of stew and be upset, and they should be. They have a right to be. Last year's Ole Miss roster was probably the first or second best roster in the entire country, and Ole Miss ended up going 9-3 with that roster. I understand that. I get it. But that doesn't change the fact that Lane Kiffin is doing a masterclass job of rebuilding that roster after those players left. And currently, if you look at 247, Ole Miss is currently the number 2 transfer portal spot in the entire portal behind LSU. And they're 5/100ths of a ranking point behind LSU, which means one more commitment and that's going to flip. And Ole Miss will be the number 1 recruiting class out there. Add that on top of the fact that Ole Miss had its best high school recruiting class in the Lane Kiffin era this season. And if you combine those two, Ole Miss is sitting at about 13 or 14 nationally through 45 recruits at about the blue chip ratio, if you believe that type of thing, available to them. Ole Miss is right where you want to be. Now, if you want to look at this another way, on 3 rates the transfer portal class based off of what's coming in compared to what's going out. So on this one right here, Texas Tech's at the highest part of it. Ole Miss is second, just like the other one. Missouri 3rd, Miami 4, LSU 5th. They're number 1 in the 247 rankings. And in these rankings to where in and out matters, LSU drops down to 5th. Ole Miss doesn't move. They're at second place as well. Ole Miss is having a really good job in the transfer portal market right now. One more transfer portal piece is all that's going to take between now and, say, February 2nd for Ole Miss to move up to that number 1 spot. Now, I do not know who it is. I have not heard any names. And I'm assuming that the roster is about 90 to 95% done as we speak. Ole Miss is surely going to pick up a couple of transfers in the late transfer portal window. Although if you've watched this podcast more than once, you know that I'm not a fan of that late transfer portal window as far as immediate contributors go. Now, you can get some guys in the second year. TJ Daugherty and Chris Graves, they were in the second year, but you don't really find immediately contributions in that late transfer portal window for whatever reason. So it is at about 90 to 95% done, the roster. And when you look at what Ole Miss has and what the other programs have, they're in good shape. And Ole Miss has added some pieces that are going to help them grow. We're going to talk about in the next segment some of the strengths added in recruiting. And when I say in recruiting, it's transfer portal and high school class. And we're going to talk in the third segment about some areas that are young or something like that that has me a little bit concerned. Not necessarily like 5-alarm concern, but it's at the point where Ole Miss has to hit on its high school evaluations for this area to be close to as good as it was a year ago. So we'll talk about that as well. But Ole Miss right now, I think they're the number 9, something like that, number 8 bet for a national champion on FanDuel, number 9 on sportsbetting.ag. The over-under on win total on sportsbetting.ag is sitting at Ole Miss at 9 wins. So that tells you what the betting sites think of the Ole Miss transfer portal haul that they've had. They would not set an over-under at a number that was easily betted against. People going to run there and hammer the under, and that sports betting company is going to take a bath. So they are fairly selective in these type things. So if they're high on Ole Miss and the media is not high on Ole Miss, and Ole Miss has 45 new players that are coming in, the number 2 current transfer portal class with a chance to be the number 1 transfer portal class when this is all said and done, I think it's time for the Ole Miss fan base to take a little optimism into this joint. I think that optimism is warranted on this team. You've had multiple months to kind of stew. And I'm an optimistic fan. Anybody that's watched 3 shows on this channel knows how optimistic I am about this Ole Miss team. I assume that players are going to reach their potential until they don't. And when they don't, I'll call them out for it. Whenever Lane Kiffin makes a mistake, I'll call him out for it. But until they do it, I will give the benefit of the doubt. I'm not the type of fan, the woe is me, the Winnie the Poohs out there, sitting here worried about everything's going to go wrong. The Eeyore fan. None of those is going to happen with me. I'm more of something, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt until you prove that you do not deserve it. For instance, right after that Florida game a year ago, I did that as well. But when you look at the players going out and players coming in for Ole Miss this season, Ole Miss has 18 players going out, all 3-star players, by the way. Not a single 4-star in the bunch. All players that really didn't play that much with the exception of Micah Pettis, and Micah Pettis was not going to be guarding Austin Simmons blindside this season. 24 players brought in, 8 or 9 4-stars coming in. It's a net plus. That's the reason Ole Miss is number 2 on this list, is because it is a net plus coming to Ole Miss versus going out. We'll see exactly how that goes as well. It's pretty cool. It is pretty interesting to think of what can happen and where Ole Miss sits at the moment. You know, with 90%, 95% of the 2025 roster now in place, it's time to break down the positions that could be the biggest strengths for Ole Miss next season. Do not miss our in-depth look at the future of the Rebels, and we'll talk about the transfer portal class as a whole. You know, therapy is a game changer. It can help you manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That is where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider that makes getting help you need easy and accessible and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours or so. It's convenient. You can have your therapy sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist in between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code SPACE80, all one word, to get $80 off your first month and show support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code SPACE80. So let's look at some of the strengths that have been built in this recruiting class. And the number one strength that we need to talk about is the wide receiver position. The wide receiver position, for lack of a better word, is dominant. If you include the transfer portal and what came in and high school recruiting, when you include Winston Watkins, Caleb Cunningham, Dylan Alford, and Samari Reed, those guys are legit. They just are the real deal. Add in the tight ends that we're going to talk about that with Luke Haas and Daquan Wright and Trace Bruckler. Those guys coming in means that Austin Simmons has a ton of toys to work with. Austin Simmons, he's a young quarterback, only 19 to 32 last year, 282 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And those numbers are better than I can ever remember a backup redshirt freshman having. Even Eli Manning did not have numbers at this level. The staff loves Austin Simmons. The wide receiver room loves Austin Simmons. The fan base is unbelievably hyped up about Austin Simmons. So it became about getting Austin Simmons the toys he needed to be successful. And what he did and what he was able to do, you started with Deshaun Stribling, wide receiver out of Oklahoma State. 52 catches, 882 yards, 6 touchdowns. This with no quarterback to speak of at Oklahoma State. They had trouble all year and struggled to win games because of their quarterback play as a revolving table started to happen. He still had nearly 900 yards receiving. He still averaged about 17 yards per catch. Still had 6 touchdowns, and it was good for Deshaun Stribling. Ole Miss wasn't done there, though. Ole Miss added Trey Wallace, Harrison Wallace III. 46 catches, 720 yards, and 4 touchdowns. All the while playing for Drew Aller, which is, if you look up mid-quarterback in the dictionary, there's a picture of Drew Aller. He's got all the combine statistics that you would want. He's Jamarcus Russell. He's Anthony Richardson. That is the type quarterback that you just assume that he's going to go there and he's going to get drafted in the first round, and then he's going to be out of the league in 2 years. That's the situation that Trey Wallace is coming from. He is walking into a room with Austin Simmons as well. It's not just wide receivers, though, as toys that Lane Kiffin got for Austin Simmons. He went out and got Luke Haas, tight end out of Arkansas. 26 catches, 324 yards, 4 touchdowns. Caleb Odom, who is a jumbo tight end, jumbo wide receiver, or flex tight end, however you want to look at it. He only had 7 catches for 65 yards in his true freshman season at Alabama, but he was a consensus 5-star player as a high school player, and you did not change that much being in a college program like Alabama's for a year. So I think he is going to be very good. And we talked about the versatility that he can provide Austin Simmons and the ability to flip in and out of 11, 12, or 13 personnel even as a tempo drive is going. That is the versatility that Caleb Odom provides. You have Daquan Wright, who had a major star turn in the Gator Bowl. Just a major star turn. 27 catches on the season, 394 yards, 4 touchdowns. And then you bring in the tight end out of New Mexico, Trace Bruckler, 22 catches, 138 yards, and 2 touchdowns. It's the toys that you're looking at offensively. It's going to work. It has to work, right? You look at the running back position, Shakai Mills-Knight, Kejuan Lacey, Jordan Simmons to add to Logan Diggs. And then you have Dominique Thomas as a 5th string level running back. That is a net plus in the running back room. The toys for Austin Simmons are off the chart. And it is probably the best collection of skill athletes as far as a totality of them that Lane Kiffin has had. There is no Trey Harris in this room at this point. There's not a Quinshon Judkins in the room at this point. Anybody thinking about Quinshon Judkins, they can probably hit up Talkspace right now for a little bit of something to talk about after he scored 3 touchdowns in the national title game. That probably has you in some sort of a way. But if you look at the depth from 1 to 5, no matter which room you're in, you're probably in a better shape than you were. So we'll see exactly how that goes, and we'll talk about some of the regular transfer portal products in just a second. And flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, the edge positions, there was a quote from Hayes Fawcett today. He put that out. Prince Will Ellen, number 3 rated edge, signed in the transfer portal so far, behind 2 players that were 5 stars coming out of high school, by the way. Number 6 is Deshaun Womack. 2 out of the top 6 players signed with Ole Miss. Edge is probably pretty good. That is probably, when you look at Suntarine Perkins and Cam Franklin, you pair them up with Deshaun Womack and Prince Will Ellen, and both of the edges are pretty well covered for Ole Miss defensively. They're in good shape. When you look at the interior of the defensive line, you have William Eccles, you have Xavion Harris, you have Jam on the defensive line as well. I forgot his last name for real quick. It happens. But he is a freshman All-American player. So they're in good shape there. When you look at linebacker, they added Jaden Yates, and they added the kid from Grambling. Just a second, I'll tell you exactly what his name is. Andrew Jones from Grambling to go with Jaden Yates. TJ Daughtery is already in that room. Tyler Banks is already in that room. They're in good shape at the linebacker level. These are the strengths of the team right now as it looks at. The front 7 for Ole Miss is going to be nasty. It just is. You're not going to run the ball very well against that front 7. You're just not. Ole Miss is going to be able to score a bunch of points. But it does lead to some areas of the team that might have some question marks, and we'll talk about that in the next segment. But just looking at this transfer portal list and who Ole Miss has brought in the transfers, 22 names as it speaks right now. You have Trey Wallace, who's a 4-star player, transfer out of Penn State. You have Kapena Gushikin transferring in from Washington State. He's probably going to be a safety. He's going to play on the inside. He is not going to be playing on the outside, even though he's listed as a cornerback. Pierce Clarkson, quarterback, California. His dad is Steve Clarkson, the famous quarterbacks coach that basically outside the Elite 11, he's kind of the dude. Jordan Simmons, running back out of Akron, transferred previously from Michigan State. Percy Lewis, offensive tackle, who was transferred from Auburn. Trace Bruckler, transfer from New Mexico State. He's a tight end. Traylon Ray, wide receiver transfer from West Virginia. Lucas Carnero, kicker, Western Kentucky. Ole Miss signed a punter as well. Just so everybody knows. I don't have the name on the list at the moment, but yes, Ole Miss did have one of those. Deuce Alexander, wide receiver, Wake Forest. Taj Chambers, linebacker, out of, I think he is Missouri State. I could be wrong there. I think this is Missouri State Bears. 3-star running back, really good player. Didn't mention him before with the Jaden Yates and the Andrew Jones. You have the Andrew Jones. You have Sage Ryan, who's kind of a Swiss Army knife. He's another guy that's probably going to play inside the hash marks for Ole Miss. He's not going to be playing corner. Jaden Yates, who is a Phil Steele All-American at linebacker. Caleb Odom is that Swiss Army knife that we talked about earlier. Antonio Kite, defensive back again. He's probably going to play some safety. I don't know that he's going to be here in the spring. I think he'll be here in the summer. Deshaun Stribling, we already talked about him. Kewan Lacey, staffs love him. They absolutely love this player. Prince Will Ellen, we talked about him earlier. Lucas earlier. Jalen Braxton, he's kind of the alpha dog corner. He's going to be expected to come in and step in. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Patrick Kutas, he is going to be expected to come in and step in. PJ Wilkins from Charlotte and Deshaun Womack. Ole Miss did very well in the transfer portal, basically maximizing what they could do. Everything that they could do, they've maximized that to the nth degree. So everybody needs to celebrate the work that Lane Kiffin is doing right now. After Ole Miss kind of stubbed its toe last season with the college football playoff, because everybody that watched the playoffs sat there and thought Ole Miss could beat this team, Ole Miss could beat this team, Ole Miss could beat this team. And I'd love to see Ole Miss go up against Ohio State. Love it. It would have been fantastic. But that didn't happen because Ole Miss lost a game to Kentucky. And that is never, never going to be okay with me. That has replaced 4th and 25 as something that's just unbearable for me. But if you want to look at the 2025 season, they have a chance to be really successful. And all you can do as a program, and honestly, what you have to do as a program is keep banging on the door. Eventually, you are going to knock that door down and you're going to get through. It started out in 2024. Ole Miss beat the Georgia Bulldogs, took them to the woodshed. Absolutely perfect game, perfect day. And that gave Ole Miss fans hope for what could happen in the future. Ole Miss needs to keep banging on that door, and eventually it's going to come down for Ole Miss. In our final segment, we're breaking down the positions that have us concerned heading into 2025. What are the challenges and how are Ole Miss working to address those issues? Do not miss it. You know, attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, the camaraderie with other fans is absolutely unmatched. I'll never forget watching my favorite team clinch a playoff victory live down in the Superdome, first ever win against the then St. Louis Rams. It's a moment I'll cherish forever. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable memories with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It cuts through the clutter and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what really matters most, being there. I recently used Game Time Picks to snag some tickets to an upcoming game, and it was such a breeze. I found a super deal that gave me amazing value for incredible seats. One of my favorite features was being able to preview the seat view before buying it. It was so helpful. Plus, with their all-in prices, there were no surprise fees at the checkout. And the Game Time guarantee gave me total peace of mind knowing that my tickets were secure and going to be delivered on time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows with this team. We have all talked about how this is not the 2024 Ole Miss team. There are weak points. There's stuff that needs to happen. There's steps that need to be made. If they can do that, Ole Miss will be fine. If you look at the over-under on sportsbetting.ag, they had it at Ole Miss at 9 wins. That means if they go over that number and hit 10 wins, they're likely in the college football playoff. That's just the way it works. And if you look at Ole Miss's schedule this year, 8 home games, hold serve at home. You have Georgia and Oklahoma on the road as tough games, and then you go at Kentucky, at Mississippi State. If you just hold serve at home and win 2 out of your 4 road games, you are in the college football playoff. Period. And that is a schedule that can make it happen. That is a schedule that can get it done. Ole Miss does have the athletes in order to win those games. So looking at that lets you know that it's there. The goal is attainable. It's realistic. It's not a pie in the sky. But there are certain areas where stepping up needs to happen. One is in the secondary. Jalen Braxton's going to be a guy. He's going to be a dude. He was freshman All-SEC. He is being brought in to play the Trey Amos role. That is the role that he has. He is good enough to do it. He's one of the most talented cover men in the SEC. And under the guidance of Pete Golding, I have no doubts that he's going to be fine. And Brian Brown and Wes Neighbors and those guys in the secondary, they're going to coach him up. But he is not Trey Amos, which means that there's probably going to be a little bit of a step down from last season. That's just the way it is. That's just the way that happens sometimes. The other cornerback position is probably going to be either Chris Graves, who played a lot last season. If you look at the corners that are here, he is the leading returner coming back. And Cedric Beavers, who was injured most of last season. I think he will turn up a little bit. Then you have the Antonio Kite, the Sage Ryans. You have the ability to mix it around. I do think Sage Ryan and Gushikin, they have a John Saunders-like plan in their future where they play inside. Kind of a box safety with coverage ability. I think you will see them do that. And that's where that's going to be. Now, in the secondary, I think one thing that everybody's forgetting about is Ole Miss signed some pretty high-level cornerbacks in this past high school recruiting class and defensive backs. Keon Young was an Under Armour All-American. Went and saw him out there with Cortez Thomas. Two of the safeties recruited by Pete Golding to come in. I think Keon Young has a chance to be a free safety in Ole Miss's defense for 3 years. I do not know that it's going to happen his true freshman year, but it might have to. I think that Keon Young has the mental ability to be able to pick up that free safety role to get on the field. He's very AJ Finley reminiscent, or Trey Washington, just guys that can see the game and diagnose what's going on. We always talk about how Austin Simmons has the ability to be like a Peyton Manning on the field and processing. On the back, Keon Young has that ability as well. And Cortez Thomas, he's a guy that I saw in Under Armour. He was back there directing other defensive backs. These are some of the best football players in the entire country, and Thomas was coaching them up. So I do think a couple of the young guys needs to step up. I don't think Ole Miss fans need to count on the late transfer portal window. Everybody that comes in gets burned. You should use that essentially for depth and not counting on a starting piece coming in. Spring practice is probably going to tell people a lot of what the secondary looks like. And if Ole Miss just comes out and starts shotgun grabbing safeties and defensive backs after spring practice, that is probably a red flag. Now, the other one is the offensive line. I think Jalen Williams and Diego Pounds are going to end up being the tackles in this offense this year, the starting tackles at least. I think Bryson Sanders is going to end up being the center. I think Patrick Kutas and Delano Townsend are penciled in as the guards. And I think after that, like Devin Harper, the true freshman, I think he's probably going to play a little bit this year. I think they're going to try and get him on the field if he can pick up the offense. I think Ole Miss might find another guard that gets shuffled in and out, and they need to find a tackle, which Ole Miss has signed a good number of players over the last couple of years on the offensive line. It's about time one of these development offensive linemen comes through. So those are the two positions that I have the most concern about going into this football season. Not concerned like, whoa, we're going to win 6 games, or we're going to all of a sudden turn into Mississippi State. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the difference between making the playoffs and not is probably in those two positions. Defensive back, offensive line. One position on each side of the ball that could determine just about everything with Ole Miss football. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the #1 Ole Miss podcast out there. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for listening to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches, covering the best conference in all of college sports. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Howdy toddy, everyone. And remember, analytics is just the old English word meaning bad football. I'll see you tomorrow.